Chapter 2. Abraham, Ladysmith, and Lamar picked handfuls of pennyroyal until they'd filled a croaker sack. Then they walked back across the meadow where summer butterflies danced over the white blooms of Queen Anne's lace. When they reached the orchard, Lamar shifted his sack from one shoulder to the other. "Mind if I sit a spell?" he asked. "I walked a tolerable long way today." "Rest yourself," said Abraham, motioning toward an old tree that offered shade. "So, what was it you did back in Georgia?" Lamar asked, as they made themselves comfortable. Charity rolled on her back in the sunshine. "What do you think?" said Abraham, raising his eyebrows almost to his forehead. "I owned a plantation?" Then he continued. "I told you, I was a slave. At first I walked as a field hand, then I worked in the stables. When the mistress saw I was good with animals, she let me drive her carriage, made me a coachman, made me a fine suit to wear too, but it didn't actually belong to me. I'd take the ladies to their parties and to town to shop. Pretty soon, the master was lending me out to other plantation owners. I drove all over that place. That's how come I was able to learn to read. Had to do it in secret though. Man owned me, wouldn't allow it." He shook his head as if clearing it of bad memories. Next place over was a fellow taught me. He was a slave too, but his owners let him learn, so as he could count at the cotton exchange in Savannah. They set great store by him. "Tell you the truth, I never pondered much on slavery," said Lamar. "Never pondered? Never thought about a human being treated like property by another human being?" For a moment, Abraham couldn't speak for the sudden anger that welled up inside him. I'm going to tell you about I'm going to tell you about a thing you can ponder on," he said fiercely, once again aware that this boy was the enemy, even if he was young and didn't know about much. "It's a bad thing. You wish to hear of it?" Lamar nodded, surprised by Abraham's sudden fierceness. He leaned his head against the trunk of the tree. "Go right ahead," he said. "It was a long time ago," said Abraham. "I come back from driving the mistress and her friends to Savannah to shop. We was riding down the alley of live oaks, leading up to the big house, when I heard somebody call me out by my name. I seen a wagon up under a tree holding my wife and two more. My heart about stopped, but I had to go on and take the ladies to the front door. When I come back, I heard Gigi, my wife, crying, and I started over to the wagon to fetch her. But Mr. Ham, the overseer for the place, warned me off. 'You, Abraham!' he yelled. 'Keep away from the wagon.' Then he told me how the three of 'em been sold." "Lord of mercy," said Lamar softly. "I asked him, just let me talk to her, but he said for me to not come no closer than 10 feet to the wagon. Gigi was crying so hard it broke my heart. I begged him again, please let me talk to her. 'You can tell her goodbye's all,' he said. Then they was gone. I never was able to learn where she went. I never saw her again. They said in the cabins that she'd been sold at the slave market in Charleston, but I don't know." "Why'd they sell her?" Lamar asked, fanning his face with his cap. Abraham shrugged. "They didn't need no reason. Money, maybe. She was a strong woman, a good worker. I loved her," he added softly. Ladysmith wiped her eyes on her sleeve. Even though she knew about Abraham's wife, hearing the story made her sorrowful all over again. "That was the day I made up my mind to get away," Abraham continued. "I wanted to run, but if I'd been caught, it'd have whooped me so bad I wouldn't have the strength to try again. So I started working every day I could, getting off the place every chance I got. My heart hurt so bad I felt like I was going to die. But I kept on keeping on. I pondered and connived from that day. At least I was better off than most, being a driver and being able to get off the place. And I heard things. So when help was offered, I took it. Someone helped fix me up with the underground, and I left that place. I left it before emancipation, before Mr. Lincoln freed the slaves." But even as he was explaining this to Lamar, something caught in Abraham's mind, like cloth catching on a thorn. A tiny prick of a thing, like a warning or a new idea. He pushed it back, unwilling to think it through. He'd had that same feeling in his head, in his mind before. It happened on the day they took Gigi away. Something terrible died in him, and something else grew. Something strong and fierce and angry. Lamar was twisting his cap around and around in his hands. I surely didn't intend to hurt your feelings when I asked about what you did back home, he said, his pale eyes anxious. Fact is, I never even knew a colored man before, and I sure didn't know no slaves. What I mean is, there wasn't any slaves where I come from in the mountains. Wasn't no plantations neither. Just farmers making a hard scrabble living. You was poor? Asked Abraham. He had known many poor whites. Too poor to paint, too proud to whitewash, Lamar replied. I got me a mule, though, he said. He's blind. Can't do much except grind corn for meal. What's his name? Lady Smith asked, intrigued by the thought of a blind mule. Jess Mule, Lamar replied. Jess Mule? She asked, thinking what a funny name that was. No, he said. Jess Mule. He smiled when she giggled and continued. When the war started, it seemed like a good way to have a little fun. I joined up when I was 14, and I wasn't the youngest in my outfit. One boy was 13, but he was big for his age. I venture to say that most of the ones not officers is around the age of 18. At first, we all figured the whole thing would be over in no time at all. Why, everybody knew that Johnny couldn't whoop 7 Yankee any time. He glanced over at Ladysmith, who had filled her lap with flowers and was weaving daisy chains. No insult intended, little lady, he said. But I learned quick that fighting wasn't no fun. I never seen men die before, at least not in battle. My folks was dead, but they died in an accident on the mountain. So when I went off to fight, I didn't have nobody but my sister. I saw battle at Manassas. Even though they say we won, that fight was a terrible thing. When I seen one wounded laying on the ground, thick as a drove of hogs, I had to wonder why. Lady Smith looked up from her flowers. Oh, Lamar, she said mournfully. You got no mama and no papa and no shoes? You should stay here with us. Which side are you on? Abraham chided her gently. Ours, she declared. But he's a poor orphan. Abraham shook his head and motioned for Lamar to continue. Some say they go back to the Union instead of all this killing, the boy went on. And I know that many would say that's not right. But I want them to come and see and feel what I have, and they would feel the same. Fact is, after a while, I wasn't sure just why I was fighting, he said, with great relief, as though he was glad to have it off his chest. What it amounts to in my eyes is we got a bunch of poor boys fighting a rich man's war. And as far as secession goes, why, we don't have but one man in the entire company's a secesh. Tell me again what that word means, Lady Smith interrupted. Somebody wants to leave the Union, the United States of America, replied Lamar, because they hate Yankees or they're scared that President Lincoln's going to take their rights away from them. Most folks left the Union because they figured they had a right to own slaves in their own states. Didn't want no President Lincoln telling them what they could or couldn't do. Of course, I figure that means if you had slaves. He looked over at Abraham. I didn't know a thing about that, he said apologetically. What I did believe that states' rights was only fair. Folks in the South figured that their rights wouldn't be worth a toot under President Lincoln, so that's why they seceded. All the newspapers said so. This war's about slavery, said Abraham. Pure and simple. Don't nobody have the right to own another human being? Nobody. And that's a truth I'd lay down and die for. Again, that tiny thorn in his head pricked sharply. That might not be why some are fighting, but that's what this war's about. Then he said, So explain to me again why you fighting against the Union. I ain't exactly fighting against it, Lamar said, looking offended. It's more like I'm fighting for the South. I can't help what some fool politician does, getting everybody all head up about seceding from the Union, and then we got to go along with it. But we can't have the federal government telling us what to do and all. When Georgia seceded, I had to go along with it, didn't I? What I mean is, Georgia's my home. Abraham picked a stalk of sourweed and chewed it slowly. I reckon this is my home now, but it wasn't easy settling in. He thought back to his days in Gettysburg. Early on, a woman shot at me, he said. Alls I ever was after was directions to Mr. Matthew Lightly's house. But she didn't let me finish, just hauled off and shot at me. Missed me, though. That was old Lady Bellinder, piped up Lady Smith, pointing across the fields. That's her farm over there. She's just hateful. Why'd she do that? Lamar asked. I asked Mr. Lightly about it, Abraham replied, and he said, 'cause she didn't know me, and 'cause I'm colored. I used to think that things was just bad for us down south, and they were. But there's folks everywhere don't like anybody different from them, I discovered. That don't give her the right to shoot at you, said Lamar. Folks is just plain peculiar when you think on it. I figured when I got in the army, I'd meet all kinds. I never been away from home still I joined the army. Never even got a letter till then. Shucks, never even wrote one before that. He looked out at the wooded hills dotted with barns and farmhouses. Back home, barns are gray instead of red, he said wistfully. It's sure different up here. I mean, everything's different. I have to tell you, first time I heard a bunch of Yankees talking, I thought they sounded like dogs barking. Roar, 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 roar. I couldn't understand them. When I first come up here, couldn't nobody understand me, Abraham grinned. They won't understand you neither. The two men laughed, and while Ladysmith wasn't sure she liked the joke, she laughed too. Abraham told how when he first got to Gettysburg, he was scared all the time. I kept thinking the patrollers were gone, come and get me, and take me back in chains. For the longest time, every noise outside my house, I just knew I was done for. What's a paroller? Ladysmith asked. Mean men with mean dogs, who chase and catch runaway slaves, said Abraham. Then he said, Lamar, tell me more about the ambulances. They got the same in the Union Army?